G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 7th of October 2025. I heard the dumbest thing today. Somebody pointed out that we had, for the first time in recorded history, I don't know if it's true or not, or exactly what they meant, but there was just a simple meme about the lack of hurricanes. And some idiot with a Ukraine flag bios put in. This is how stupid they are, right? Put in so far. It's like the fucking 7th of October, or 6th in the United States, but this is how fucking stupid people can get. They're so wrapped in hatred, right? Whether it's Ukraine or the environment or abortion or feminism or transgenderism, anything anti-Christian, they support. And if you have not seen that pattern recognition yet, look again. It's there. Plain as day. The people who support Ukraine are anti-Christian. So if you're still pro-Ukrainian, after seeing how much in love, and I get it, a lot of Trump supporters think, well, if Trump's supporting Ukraine, I must support Ukraine. He's supporting Ukraine because so many people are... It's a political trap, right? We want to get out of this political trap. And the only way to get the president out of a political trap is to steer further and further away from Ukraine, because Ukraine is a political trap. Ukraine is not a democracy. It's a fascist, racist state. It is... This is what they do to ethnic Russians. And they jail them as collaborators. Yes, while the West pontificates about Russia jailing anti-war protesters, which as far as I'm concerned, have the same goddamn morality about Ukraine. But the left has no moral compass. It stands for destruction. It stands for the Antichrist. It stands for Judaism. It stands for Hindus. It stands for brown people. It stands for Marxism. It stands for Islam. It stands for anything but Christ. It stands for anything but white people. It is a vile, disgusting, racist ideology that right now is fermenting and experimenting in Ukraine to turn its country into a festering wound on civilization itself. To destroy civilization itself, because the selfish, because they cannot make it, they want to destroy it. They cannot accept that they can't have the life of luxury, so they have to destroy it, because some people achieve that rare measure of success in those pathetic little greedy minds. Never mind that most of the left is actually funded by the very people who live the life of luxury, not realizing that the left is nothing more than useful idiots destroying the success of others. Now Kiev brags about persecuting Ukrainian politicians, and the left, and there's nothing from the left or right. You look up censorship in Ukraine, you may get one article, but the rest is all about Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia. They talk about media manipulation, and then you look at arrests in Ukraine, and look at it. Russia, Russia, Russia. This is the political manipulation that goes on and on and on. Now, before I continue, I'd like to thank the people who support the channel and invite you to support the channel. Now, I'm not going to go on and on every day about YouTube, but YouTube in the last month has changed the algorithms. You may notice view counts go on some videos are almost non-existent. People who were once popular are not getting recommended to you. You may have noticed your homepage sometimes only shows a row of 2, sometimes a row of 3. It doesn't even remember. It randomizes ads. It doesn't even remember, like, you tell it, no, I don't like this. I'm not into women's hygiene products. And the next day, they'll flood your ads with women's hygiene products. It's like, and then you contact Google and say, well, you only didn't like that one ad. And you tell them the advertising is irrelevant to you, and they double down. Okay? They are trying to force people like me off the platform. They want to become more like MTV. They want to reduce the number of videos per day. They want to reduce the number of people on the reduce the number of content creators. And predominantly, they're punishing us for you using ad blockers. I'm not going to tell you not to use an ad blocker. I'm not going to tell you that you have to use Google Chrome. That if you're watching on your phone and you're not signed in, you don't count. I'm not going to tell you to sign in just so you can like the video and subscribe and be... They track you anyway by your phone, okay? If you got Apple, Google, HTC or whatever, they're tracking you, okay? Stop being paranoid about signing into YouTube, okay? They track you anyway, okay? If they want to track you, they track you, no matter what. And you think you're making it harder by not signing in? They don't care about you. Okay, one little statistical anomaly. They care about collecting as much data as possible, and they don't care how they get it. And if they don't get it, they start pushing you out. Soon you won't be able to watch most YouTube unless you sign in. Soon they'll have ID verification and everything. All the people... I lost all my patrons on my writing channel because they asked for ID verification. It's pointless telling you what's going on because nobody seems to want to do anything about it, because you stand up and say, but it's a private company. A private company who monopolizes and manipulates and has admitted they're controlling the internet. So, it's getting harder to get information on the Ukraine war. It is getting harder to bring you the truth because the truth is being censored out. Being replaced by propaganda where Ukrainians glorified constantly, and the low IQ people out there just see something and say, oh, it must be true, I see it everywhere. And it's like, but this is what the Nazis did in the 1930s. They undermined society. They destroyed the economy. People say, oh, but the Great Depression. No, Germany was crawling out of the Great Depression. Germany had already made negotiations to... they were paying off their debts in gold coins at a fixed value, at a fixed rate. Okay, the German economy was on the verge of recovery when mass violence broke out. Now, originally it was the brown shirts and then came the black shirts. The black shirts were Antifa. They became... But when... And this is the same thing they did in Ukraine, okay? Ukraine, it started with a handful of private militias, and then more and more. Okay, until the private militias, the Ukrainian National Guard, the Azov battalions, controlled Ukraine because instead of 7 million standing up to their fellow Ukrainians and saying no, instead they left the country. So the majority left, handing the country over to the minority. That's the same problems over and over again. That you are so in love with liberal democracy, you don't realise liberal democracy is the enemy of the state. It's only a facade to make sure that you are weak, that you will not unite against any threat to your freedom. That if a black person screams about black supremacy, you sit there and do nothing. If a black man murders a white woman, you sit there and do nothing because you're told about the Tulsa riots and that it was a fake. Was it? Question mark. Given the pattern recognition of the last 30 years, shouldn't you go, wait a minute, when did this Tulsa... Nobody heard of the Tulsa riot until recently, and then suddenly it's a huge museum, huge amount of evidence and facts that it was all fake, and suddenly you trust the Democrats after they lied about lockdowns and COVID. How much more lies do they have to tell before you turn around and say they're faking history? They're lying about World War I. They're lying about World War II. They don't want to tell us the truth. They can't tell us the truth. They don't. That liberalism, that everything the Democrats have done has always been nothing but self-serving crimes against humanity. That they are beyond redemption as a political movement. Look at Hillary Clinton. Look at the lies. She sits there and time again tells you to rise up against Donald Trump. That you must resist. We're in a democracy. We vote out our political opponents. We do not undermine and destroy our political opponents just because you lost the election. But that's what they want to do. They want to get you to riot, loot, and destroy so they can win elections because they can't handle losing. And that's why we have a Ukraine war. Because a bunch of losers got together, got power, and went on a rampage to make sure that they cannot lose elections again. To make sure and to experiment on the people so that they can use political violence. And you've seen it. Once they got away with it in Nuremberg. Once the Nazis got away with political violence in Nuremberg, they went nationwide. You see the same thing in Chicago, Portland. They are spreading. But fortunately, we do have the same when we look at Ukraine. Okay, it started in Azov, which is why the name Azov Battalion. They set fire to Russians. They murdered ethnic Russians in Odessa. The more they got away with, the more the EU just stood back and said, this violence is collapsing a pro-Russian Ukraine. We will say nothing about it. And they now can't say anything about it. George Soros is responsible for the death of millions of Ukrainians. But he gets away with it because he hides behind because he can turn around and accuse everybody of being an anti-Semite. Just like Ukraine can accuse anybody they don't like of being a Russian supporter. And when Russian drones attack Russia, when Ukraine attacks Russia, they're defending themselves. But when Russia retaliates, Russia's the aggressor. That is the moron mentality of this war. You have to have a moral compass. Judge not lest you be judged. If you judge something, you are going to be judged for that judgment. I get that. But you have to be honest. And people are not being honest. The Polish have arrested a Ukrainian wanted by Germany over his involvement in the Nord Stream gas pipeline. He's been detained for another 40 days. Now, they didn't exactly say when this arrest was, but what we have is nothing here of value. Very few stories of value are coming out of Al Jazeera. They are quickly degenerating. They're bigger degenerates than they were last year. They're still not as bad as The Guardian, The Sun. You know, Murdoch has always claimed to be right-wing. But in fact, 90% of his journos are left-wing. You know that. Okay? The hacking scandal. They're a bunch of leftists. Realising the fact that they themselves cannot be personally held liable for their actions. So they had no constraints. They couldn't lose their job because they were union protected. They could be sued because the employer was held liable for their actions. That's not democracy, folks. That is a dictatorship where the left alter the rules to suit themselves. Now, yesterday, this was reported as a drones were launched here. An oil depot in Odessa was attacked off the coast. Is Ukraine illegally using shipping? We don't know the full extent of what happened, but obviously Ukraine is using neutral shipping as cover for their actions and activities. And sooner or later, we do expect Russia to lose assets and get attacked. But sooner or later, you have to ask yourself, at what point is this war really about stopping Russia, or it's about manipulating the world price of oil? When are you going to wake up to the fact that that is exactly what Ukraine is doing, and the American government should be held up and said to every representative, stop this bullshit. Ukraine is not brave. They are cowards hiding behind NATO. They are not our friends. They are not our allies. They're fair weather buggers who put their hands in our pocket because nobody else will support them or help them. And that kind of desperation should not be heralded. A friend in need is not a friend indeed, it's a parasite. Now we have new symbol at Sumni. What's this? So this is a person was wounded by an anti-personnel explosion. That would be a cell phone. That would be a Ukrainian civilian hurt by Ukrainian. But how many people? Why is it red? It's not a Russian mine. It's in Sumni. It's not on the front line. Of course, anything to smear Russia, anything to mislead. Now, we don't have much activity here in the north. We don't have, whether it's Sumy or Kharkiv, but north of Kupiansk, we do have some movement, and the buffer zone is expanding. Now, Putin has made it clear the war will end either when Ukraine accepts the reality on the battlefield or they achieve their goals. And they won't. So, right now, probably nothing. We have street fighting throughout Kupiansk. But we do not have full occupation of Kupiansk. The Russian commanders, again, have not pushed the offensive in towards Lyman, but it's growing. They're forming a new cauldron, and they have a breakthrough south of Zakrin, pushing forward. We have all this north of Seversk. We have the Russians advancing here south, Fedora. We have more territory. Yeah, the Russians have taken more territory. It seems, what should we call it? A natural barricade forming the battlefield lines here. Though still at least the possibility of an armoured column advance through here once they've taken care of the majority of... See, this ain't like World War One where 17 miles from the front you were safe because limited artillery range. The bigger the artillery... Back then, the bigger the artillery, the shorter the range. Except by World War II, the improvements in gunpowder, barrels, they could fire shells further. You would not want Russia to bring up its big guns. But they have. They've started to bring up its mainstay artillery. Is actually, though considered a heavy gun at 153, they do have 170 and 203 millimeter. Not many. I think they have also a few large railguns. Now, railgun is a term that's going to be changing soon. Now, in the old vernacular, a railgun, it's an artillery piece mounted on a railway platform because it's too big, too heavy for roads. And yeah, I don't know how many the Soviets have left of their old artillery. I know they have a few. I think a lot of them are museum pieces, but right now, and I don't understand the logic because it's not fully explained why it's a limited special military operation, but the general gist of the explanation, is that after the war, Russia has to live with what it's done and will still have to live with Ukraine as its neighbours. So they want to minimise the damage. Ukraine doesn't have that compulsion, or they see it as a fight for their survival, and they are trying to, and yet the majority of Ukrainians don't see it that way. Like, you don't see 82% of Ukraine racing to the front to stop the Russians like the Russians did in World War II. You have no idea how millions in World War II, millions of Russians raced to the front lines to defend the Soviet Union. It was pretty much a wall of men, which is why so many died. So many were unarmed, there was a lack of food. And they pretty much devastated Eastern Europe. And to some extent, though they helped rebuild Ukraine, the relationship remains toxic to this day. But see, these are traditional battle lines. They know. Russia knows because Russia built them. And they're going, as Trump said, when the Russians can't go down the road, they cross the fields. This is the relentless Russian war machine in action. It's methodical. It's well thought out. But unlike the Soviet era, it is not racing. See, the Soviet doctrine was to overwhelm. Never give the enemy time to rest or regroup. But that works when you have millions. But the Soviet Union not only had millions, it cost them millions. It cost them, and they never recovered from it. They lost half their population, and even today, with population growth, it's still well below normal. It never recovered. It hasn't recovered. And nor has Ukraine. Ukraine psychologically hasn't recovered from the Soviet era. These two need to spend time apart. Because but the West is stoking this war in order to, because Europe's economy is fucked. And Europe is trying to proxy war Russia to destroy the Russian economy so that the price of oil will go up, so that the gas and oil in Europe is worth more, and they can. But they're fleecing them. It's all about GDP, you know. Your numbers go down, ours go up. We take your resources to pay to. It's a moron's game, okay? Zelensky and his crooks, sooner or later, will pay the price for their lies and corruption. But will it be a just price, or will it just merely be the same price so many dictators in the past have paid and merely told to go away and stay out of public life? Now, this town, Novo, the Russians have made huge advance here, but it's not reported on Ukrainian sites. But they've made huge headways. Again, the Ukrainians' offensive that pushed the Russians back, well, there's only a matter of time now before the Russia, whatever artillery and they'll finish off this first, but whatever artillery and resources they had put into these little offensives here will eventually be turned on these. No movement, major movement has occurred in this area. The focus right now does appear to be the Kosk, Pop and Mira may only have a brief reprieve, though. Now, Ukraine has claimed a victory here. A town that had fallen to the Russians has been allegedly liberated by the Ukrainians. But as we've seen so many times in the past, this little victory, give it 24 to 48 hours to see whether or not, one, it happened. Two, again, a lot of this area does not have a lot, see what the Russians do, because Ukrainian offensives tend to get annihilated, tend to fall for a trap. And what did they lose? Ukraine gains one town back for losing two. That's not winning. And how many Ukrainians died for Zelensky's pride just so he can tick a box on them and tell the people we liberated another village? But how many in a week's time will he be telling people that we lost? Oh yeah, all these villages we liberated. Well, Russians took them back. How many people have to die for pride, greed, envy? I'm telling you right now, these people were black, you would see Democrats rallying to their cause. If Russia was black right now, they would be screaming about European aggression. This is the closest you get to morality on the left. Anti-whiteism. Now, for some reason, the battle for Zaporozhye is still being fought down here. But the Russians are trying to keep this road open to them, to Zaporozhye, and the Ukrainians are trying to keep it closed. And it's intensified. Now, again, you think, all right, a couple of bombs, this majority of this war is about pressure, not destruction. Which is hard to explain because, yes, Russia is destroying things, but they're not destroying the entire town. They're just trying to destroy the areas that are involved with the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian government. Now, according to the Russian news, Ukrainian troops have reported that an army center in Kharkov region was hit, and they lost about 300 troops. But if you go back to the Ukrainian map for October 3rd, there's nothing about it. And if you go back to Al Jazeera, they'll just tell you that they only hit civilian target. So this is the problem. The media increasingly is lying, and there's no punishment for the media lying. Numerous attacks on Ukrainian army centers have been recorded. So Ukraine is moving its army centers to Poland or Romania. It's removing its facilities. Many are underground. Many of it's it's moving its defense industries to Denmark. Now, senior fellow for Russia studies at the Washington-based Simpson Center, Peter Slezkine, is confident that President Trump is still willing to make movement and to ensure that a thaw in Russian relations goes ahead and achieves a satisfactory resolution in Ukraine. Though there is still discussion about Tomahawk missiles going on, Putin has clarified that they will respond, that they will shoot down the missiles and attack their launch sites if they are. So, I mean, this is the thing, right? You claim Israel has the right to defend itself. Why not Russia? And Ukraine is now, Denmark is now participating in the war. Production facilities, memorandum with Ukraine signed a memorandum with Denmark for joint defence production. This is the same one they signed with England. 100 years, English will be forced to work, pay taxes to fund Ukraine, and now Denmark. So much for democracy, hey? When was the vote that said you are now a slave and forced into servitude for the Ukrainian state? Now, the statement from Vladimir Putin makes it very clear. Supplies of US Tomahawk missiles to Kiev may end any discussion with the United States. They're going to respond. See it as a direct involvement, because there is a law in the United States, I forget what it's called, where frontline defense equipment must remain in the hands of US command. Alright. A typical M4, which is supposed to be replaced, by the way. Some people still have M16s, National Guard or whatever. But typically, the rollout of the M4 and other weapons has all been botched. Trump is trying to fix that. Congress is in the way because different states, they all want their fingers in the pie. You know how it goes. Nobody wants to do the right thing. Everybody wants to do what gets them the most votes. The whole idea of a free market is that the buyers and sellers can act in self-interest. If you are too expensive, I go with you. But the US military, and they're trying to standardize everything, I get it, because you need training, you need logistics and support to be unified, has run into issues of the collective self-interest of the defense industry, and they buy the politicians to side with the seller when they're the buyer. The buyer should not be siding with the seller. That is not a free market. So Putin is using that recognition that US maintain control even when Tomahawk missiles are sent overseas, that it would be an escalation and undermine US-Russian relationships. You may not remember, but Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, I believe it was 6 months before he was untimely murdered, had bombed the temple at Kushi because of anti-US because the rubber union organized protests against US involvement in the Vietnam War. Funny, right? That escalation had increasingly sent US advisors to the front lines, put men in harm's way. Manufacturing consent is what it's called. Here we have the Russians saying, well, if you're going to manufacture consent, you're escalating. Are you prepared to do that? Well, Trump has given his answer. Maybe. First, he wants to know where they're going to send them. Considering is the word. Lavrov is responding by saying that Ukraine can't be trusted. They won't use them responsibly. No, he doesn't elaborate what he means, just that they would not be used responsibly, and that Washington is listening to its European supporters, along with who are in turn guided by Kiev's ambitions, which is absolutely true. But the US is not the only one. UK is furious that its Russian strategy has failed. Keir Starmer has apparently gutted senior positions at the spy agency and replacing people with more pro-Ukrainian voices. So people who warned him that the Russia strategy was going to fail have been fired and replacing them with more positive voices when they're the ones who failed. He's rewarding failure. Again, this is what the left do, though, however. The left reward political allies rather than merit. See, the left rose to positions of prominence because they worked hard to take over the institutions. But once they took them over, they turned from a merit-based system into a political-based system. And you won't judge them by and lock them out. So you have a Ukraine war because the right won't defend civilization. That's the problem. The right fail time and time again to recognise the left lie. The left have you not learnt from the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolutions, that when the left have enough power, same with Islam, when Islam has enough power, they wipe out their opposition. You cannot let them thrive. The scorpion never changes from being a scorpion. Now, we have reports that from Russia of taking control of Fedorovka and the Tuesdays, Nova Tuesday, which is today, almost over. Now, this is about an hour ago. Now, yesterday was Order Novi. Again, that one was a small one. This is Fedor is not big, but Nova, that's big because it brings more artillery to the siege of Myron. And of course you have the loss of around 300 Ukrainians. And people may say, oh, but Russia's lost more troops. Yeah, in World War II, Russia lost more troops. They still won. In World War II, America lost 1.1 million in Europe alone, and yet still won. You actually killed only 900,000 Germans. You took a lot more prisoners, though. That's a difference. But yeah, you killed. The Germans inflicted more losses on its enemies and still lost. So don't go by battlefield losses alone. Now, it's not just, well, in various areas, Ukraine has lost hundreds. But again, it's a slow day. Usually this would be much higher. I don't know why it's a slow day. Perhaps both sides have inflicted enough losses to and getting close to fatigue, and we'll have to start rotating troops or face situations again like where the battle Polsk and other areas like Bakhmut stalled, Chavez stalled. Now, Silvesk is close to falling, but it's still a long way out. It's close. They're closer than ever, but it's stalled. Again, only one tank lost. Remember, like, every day, and I've seen this time and time again, you see pro-Ukrainian channels reporting about Russia losing hundreds of tanks. It's not true. Neither side is putting large numbers of equipment at risk at any one time. You may see a battle where, a lone Ukrainian tank allegedly destroys all these Russians. But I've seen equally the same story over and over and over again. Usually, when you see tank battles, you see four. I've seen one where two Russian tanks were going down the road. The first one was hit from behind. The other was hit by multiple hits. Now, I've seen also rare instance where a T-90 did speed forward and took out a number of Ukrainian tanks before itself was hit and went off the road and got stuck. And yeah, the Ukrainians came along and dragged the Russian tank out and took the tank. But they didn't tell. But the Ukrainian media never told you the part where the Russian tank had destroyed 4 Ukrainian tanks, which is rare. Usually, before itself was detracked and then dragged off by a Ukrainian tractor. But don't forget, tractors have been used by Ukraine and Russia for decades now as tank recovery. You actually look at US tank recovery. It's basically a big tractor engine in a steel cage. And those stories are actually rare. But what happens is people repeat them over and over again every week as if they always happen. Yet here I am looking at the battlefield news and loss of equipment, and I'm saying most of the time you could say, well, I think given the situation and various people like Conor McGregor and others have said, you look at the battlefield losses and you know, right, that 70% of the Ukrainians are most likely dead and only about 30%. And that's the difference in the war, which is why Russia is still slowly advancing. The Russians aren't losing that many. And most Russians still support Putin. Where in Russia, yeah, you may go to jail for opposing Putin, but in Ukraine, you're branded an orc and tortured. You have your eyes taken out. Yeah, so that's the democracy you're defending. I hope. Yeah, maybe I am trying to change your mind. Maybe I'm trying to actually have you see common sense. And realize, do you really want to take on the trouble of ruling the world? You want this homogeny where your tax dollars are going to support troops on the border troops to occupy Russia. Yeah, I know the Democrats and their supporters are going to say, yeah, but look at Japan. Yeah, look at all the hatred of foreigners in Japan. Right? Americans aren't welcome anymore, even. You outstayed your welcome. You're not good. You're not the world police. And nor did the founders want you to be the world police. You can have good alliances, but this European alliance as it stands is toxic. It's a toxic relationship where you have liberal democracies just wanting more and more and more, where the politicians are front for corrupt kleptocrats who use state power to destroy their opposition and to turn everything into quasi-state industries like Amazon, Microsoft, all these big blue chip companies. And yeah, the right does it too, but we have to cut. We have to cut down to the bare minimum we need and make sure these industries can stand on their own and are not crushing their opposition using, government contracts to crush opposition and buy them up, like Amazon. Amazon's ridiculous growth because ridiculous profits. That's taxpayer money. And again, it has to be a free market decision. But it has to be, but for us to make a decision, we have to know the truth. I'm trying to bring you the truth, but the truth needs legs. The truth needs to spread. We don't have to have violent protests in the streets. All we have to do is have enough people telling politicians, showing up at primaries and going, you support Ukraine? And the moment they say yes, you get up and walk out and say, I'm voting for the other guy. I'm not voting for the guy who supports war to defend Ukraine's borders when you won't do the same for the US border. You want to know what's wrong with Chicago? The mentality of vote blue no matter who. What's wrong with Chicago is Chicago's votes for black mayor after black mayor after black mayor simply because they're black. Until Americans say, you know what, they're going to call me racist, I might as well be one. And that will destroy the black supremacist movement in America forever, when you will not tolerate them ever again telling you that you're a racist. Because all you're going to do is turn around and say, so what? You're one. Every time you hear Democrats talking about voting against your self-interest, they're talking about getting you to vote against your self-interest to support everybody else's. And that's what they're doing, folks. Every time they don't get their way, They start a war. It's about time they got punished for starting wars, don't you think? How many more wars do they have to start? Obama, the economy. Oh, things aren't going well. We'll have a coup in Ukraine. And then wonders why nobody likes him. As he's sitting there on his $100 million Netflix deal. Where's my $100 million Netflix deal? Obama, you keep talking about how everybody's equal. Well, where's my $100 million Netflix deal? Please like, share and subscribe. Please support the channel. Without your support, I cannot make a living. That's a fact. Okay? So please, support me on Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Please and thank you. See you in the next video. Bye for now.